Hi, I'm Brandon Schneider with the Berkeley Center for the Study of Religion. We're here today to ask 5 questions of Jason Klosek, a past BCSR summer grantee who just finished his PhD in political science at Berkeley, completing a dissertation entitled The Cult of Coercion, Religion and Strategic Culture in British Counterinsurgency. 5 questions is a playful nod to 5 years of BCSR programming and is intended as a relatively informal way to get a better idea of the people and the activities that make up the BCSR community. Jason, thank you for being here.
It's a real pleasure to be with you. Thank you for having me.
So, like I said, you just finished your dissertation. You're headed to Notre Dame. Very exciting time in a young scholar's life. But before we get to that, could we take a step back and could you tell us how you got here? How and why Berkeley? Why political science? Professionally and personally, what brought you to this point?
Sure, I think it's the perfect place to start. In some way, I'm going full circle with the postdoc at Notre Dame because I did my undergrad there. And it was there that I first sort of fell in love with the idea of learning about and experiencing various religious traditions. I was particularly lucky to have a mentor there named David Burrell, who's a well-known and respected theologian, but was also extremely pastoral in his relationship with students and guiding students to ask and explore interesting questions. And so it was really a class I took with him and then travel in the Mediterranean, where he introduced me to a synagogue in Crete called Etz Chaim Synagogue, which I eventually spent time in. It is the only synagogue on the island. It was rebuilt in the early 2000s. It's sort of become this place for interfaith dialogue, and also the preservation of Greek, particularly Cretan Jewry, which is a very obscure topic.
Okay.
But it was really the time there that got me interested in religion as a social force, and then also religious violence, which I got to see firsthand there on a small scale, in that there was a fair bit of anti-Semitism still in Greece generally and on Crete. And shortly after I left the synagogue that they became wrapped up in this series of arson attacks that kind of swept through Europe around that time as well, in which there were various synagogues that had either burnt down or graffitied. And so that's a long way of saying, I was fascinated by religion from an early period, but it was the experiencing of it, both the lived tradition and the discrimination and violence that got me thinking about it.
And did you have
more.
any previous connection to Crete or
I had
any of this?
No previous connection. I was studying abroad in Greece. My dream had been to go to Jerusalem. This will date me a little, but because of what was at the time the most recent wave of violence there, Notre Dame canceled their program. And so David had directed me towards this program in Greece that he knew people and knew it was an interesting program and a place where it had specifically an undergraduate component to study religion in the Mediterranean region. And so I sort of stumbled upon the synagogue through David and fell in love. It was a fascinating place where you had people from many different faiths passing through, but it was also an anomaly in terms of some Jewish traditions as well. It's a synagogue with a cemetery, which is very rare because of particular laws. Anytime a Cohen came in, we had to warn them. There was a cemetery. And then the person who ran it, Nikos Stavroulakis, he was a well-known historian of Greek and Cretan Jewry. So it was sort of an intellectual community in the strangest of places.
And did this lead to your MA at Georgetown?
So it led to Peace Corps in the Turkmenistan. So I got the travel bug. And so even though I was interested in questions about religion and religious violence, and this says a little bit how I ended up in political science, at the time I had no idea what discipline or which discipline I could best answer those questions. I had never taken a political science course.
Really?
Until the MA. So political science was not on the table, but travel was. And I went to Turkmenistan. And it was in Turkmenistan that I continued to explore particularly religion and religious minorities. I live in one of the more diverse towns at the time, which still had different ethnic groups from Russian and Azeri and Armenian and Uzbek and Turkmen, but also religious groups. So there were also Shiite groups with secret mosques. They were hidden mosques. And I also came to know a Catholic community there that operated an underground church.
Wow.
So the Catholic community was allowed to have an embassy because of the Vatican and diplomacy. So it had a nunciature, is what it was called, but they also did masses.
Wow.
And so that continued my interest in religion, particularly looking at religious discrimination in that country. And then I actually went back to Crete after the Peace Corps and really started thinking about which direction I wanted to go. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized religion and conflict, partially because of what was going on in the world, that was my interest. And I started searching for what I thought, my approach was the discipline that would give me the tools to address those questions. And again, because of current events, political science was the discipline that was starting to tackle contemporary religious conflict. As much as I appreciate my mentors, they were much more historically oriented. Nikos in Crete was a scholar of Ottoman history. I sort of moved in that direction, did a master's at Georgetown, and then came to Berkeley.
Okay. Before we dive into your work at Berkeley, your dissertation, one quick question kind of in the background. You have this really fascinating experiences abroad. But back home, where did you grow up, and did you have any exposure to any of this religious conflict or religious tensions, etc.?
So I grew up in a small coal mining town in western Pennsylvania. It was a pretty boring suburban childhood, and I was raised Catholic. And so I think I had, I think the benefit I had in growing up, particularly in sort of a lower socioeconomic family, was that religion was always something lived for us. We didn't spend long periods of time discussing Catholic doctrine, but we did spend a lot of time living and thinking about how our Catholic teaching applied to our lives and that of our neighbors. And so religion was always a part of my life, but it really wasn't until I went away to Notre Dame that I started thinking about it systematically, sort of in the background. Which again I think does play into my research. I think of religion as something that's always in the background, even if it's not causing conflict.
It's there.
And so that's shaped a lot of how I approach it in political science, where we are obsessed with causes of things. And it's one reason I think my discipline has resisted studying religion. But as soon as you think of religion as a background condition rather than a cause, you realize it's influencing things in many varied ways.